Have you ever wondered why your favorite taco is costing you an arm and a leg these days? Or is your dream couch still on backorder for months now? Join us as we go behind the scenes of the global supply chain. Let us discuss, understand its complexity, and learn from industry leaders, professionals, and subject matter experts. Expect in-depth analysis and genuine conversations about the major issues affecting the supply chain today. Welcome to Supply Chain Demystified. Your host is none other than distinguished supply chain expert, Dr. Nick Vyas. Professor Vyas is the academic director of USC Marshall's Global Supply Chain Management and the founding executive director of USC Marshall Randall R. Kendrick Global Supply Chain Institute.
I believe that piece leads me to this whole conversation that we had in Austin about the AI, multi-agentic. You and I have shared some thoughts on this. I think this technology revolution and evolution is much different than going in the cloud or the World Wide Web or the e-commerce and many things we've enjoyed since then. I remember my first conversation in corporate America where I was in a C-suite meeting and I said, we need to move our data into the cloud. And I literally got chased out of the room. They said, are you kidding me? You want data to be in the cloud? You want...
I was a city council member and we were the first city in Los Angeles, I led this, to move our email to the cloud. And everybody said, it's not secure. And I said, so the interns who are the servers that are dripping battery acid underneath City Hall, written in Cobalt and Fortran, that's more secure?
That's more secure, exactly. So those were the paradigms,
Yeah,
right?
right.
But then I see those paradigms, Eric, that created new sets of jobs. Let's talk about your world. Have you seen this from being a mayor, the ambassador, your work in working in the communities? How do you see this AI, agentic AI, penetrating in our society? And how do you think, because the policymakers, not only in the United States, I think across the globe, they're still falling asleep behind the wheel. Yeah. I've not seen any proactive engagement in terms of the understanding and anticipating what's on the horizon. So nothing is being done. What are your take on it?
I think I'm pretty average in the sense that when I think about where AI is moving, I'm simultaneously as excited as I've ever been about anything in life, because you see, it's almost like our social media feeds. You can travel the world, see the most beautiful photographs, get a little bit of psychiatric advice, be inspired by a story, all in the first 10 minutes after you wake up. But like many people I do, I often look at a feed of Instagram or something in the morning, and we know it's bad and we know we love it at the same time. AI is the same thing, where if we're starting to use it, and I've been pretty aggressive in kind of going in, both as an ambassador and training a workforce to use AI and helping, for instance, the people that used to translate into all the Indian languages, the morning newspaper, and spend all day so that we'd have clips knowing what was going on. We automated that with AI and they said, oh, you're putting me out of a job. I said, no, I want you to have lunch with a reporter and talk about the stories we could get out there. You've been stuck inside a room for the last 20 years doing translations. And they're like, oh, that's a much better thing to do than becoming a factory worker, just translating from, Gujarati, whatever the latest, things are. And so, I've used that as a boss, as an employer. I use it personally right now on research, which for all of us, it's astounding. I gave a lecture at a university I won't name across town 2 nights ago that has an 8 clap instead of a fight on. And it was called the Brody Memorial Lecture on the Conditions of Peace after the great kind of strategist and academic Bernard Brody. And I'm telling you, I was able to do what would have probably been a year of research in a month, if not maybe a week. And it made me such a better thinker when I finally gave the lecture that I was going to give. So I see it. On the flip side, the pace with which this is moving is more quickly than policy knows to advance. So Gina Raimondo, my dear friend, we studied at Oxford together years ago as grad students, and I saw each other in Washington. She's raising money sometimes from the AI companies that are producing these models to say, let's start drafting legislation that when people do get rid of jobs because of AI, disincentivize that in the tax structure. In other words, if you're saying Anthropic or OpenAI, we're going to create a lot of efficiency and new future jobs. In the meantime, there's going to be a lot of losers. Let's not make the same mistake we were just talking about with globalization, and maybe what happened over 20 years could happen in 2. Let's make sure that we have a transition plan for people to be retrained, a place for people to get enough money to feed their families, actually put in legislation and the tax code and other things that will help us take the good of AI forward and lessen the bad of it that's coming. And the last piece, I serve on the Carnegie Endowment for Peace Global Advisory Council. We just had a meeting and a briefing in Washington. When we look at the security aspects, we all need to be concerned. When we hear that Russians are now looking at completely AI-driven drone warfare models, where no human being is involved after the architecture, I think a few years ago, people are like, oh yeah, they're just trying to get us to watch their piece or click on their article by talking about Terminator 2. But that moment where we see autonomous warfare is as dangerous, if not more dangerous than when we split the atom and when we had nuclear weapons. And if we're not ahead of that soon, even if the percentage might be small, that percentage, if it ever did come through, would be devastating to our existence. And I think that is incredibly important to focus
No,
on.
and I completely agree with you. So I think we're going to get into the geopolitics, but let me actually give you my thoughts on this human capital side. If you want to predict the future, look at some of the past. Right? So let's look at the recent past. The outsourcing boom, mid-80s to late 80s, right, left about close to 1.2 million blue-collar workers on the Rust Belt behind. It was companies were quick, implementation was rapid, efficiencies were driven amazingly, profits were soaring. What we forgot about it is these hardworking blue-collar workers across the Rust Belt. Factories were shut, tons disappeared, and we know the implication of that and the outcomes of these elections, right? That population was deserted almost. When I look at and compare that to the scenarios of AI, Eric, what concerns me is not the blue-collar jobs are not as good as the white-collar jobs. I think the digital AI, and we can talk about physical AI, but the digital AI primarily targets the white-collar jobs. So I mean, imagine, I know you have a young daughter. My 2 daughters, my daughter and a son got married. One is in finance and one is in medicine. They see clearly in their late 20s that there are a lot of things that they spend 14, 15, 18 years of their lives studying about it can be marginalized. This kind of disruption we haven't seen. As a policymaker, how do you even envision these forces, and what do you think, A, do, and B, where do you find the resources? And I have some ideas about what I think may be controversial in some ways, but I would love to hear your perspective.
So let me address that by stepping back one step, because I think we've lived in the most stable building in human history of any generation, or I'd argue 2 to 3 generations. There was an international order to international relations.
And you're talking about post-World War II.
Post-World War II, because of a century of warfare and suffering and millions of deaths. It existed in international relations and diplomacy. It existed in an economic system where there was more of a consensus, not always everybody, but mostly a consensus of globalization, capital. And then third, kind of domestically in the United States, we've gone back and forth with parties, but we figured things were stable and better than anywhere else, and they'd always be the way they are. And all 3 are crumbling. Some blame Donald Trump for that. I say he's just the guy who walked by the crumbling building and threw a Molotov cocktail in it. Like, it's on fire, but it was coming down one way or another. We can act as firefighters, we can act as, tenants who want to restore it, but we should be acting as architects and engineers of what comes next. Because I think when we look at the question that you asked, if we're not stress testing, so in policy, it was always incremental change, it was reforming. We have a good building, let's just redecorate, bring in new furniture, maybe fix the pipes, bring in some new systems, but it's the same building. This is a moment where I think the Trump administrations, and not just he, but other places, including sometimes during the Biden administration, we're seeing how outdated those things are and how radically they have to change. If we're to cure housing and homelessness in a state like California and the housing crisis around America, it's not going to be reforming and tinkering. It's going to be something more radical. If we're going to respond to what AI is going to do to our economy, we're going to have to think radically in the same way that the founding fathers of this country, imperfectly, sometimes hypocritically, but for the most part pretty brilliantly, thought about the changing moment of going from monarchy to democracy. This is one of those moments. And I think that they wouldn't say that they were the only smart generation that ever existed. Are we smart enough? Are we intellectually ambitious enough to start thinking about what that architecture needs to look like? Maybe not a single building, but a series of buildings by region or by topic. How are we going to deal with climate change? How are we going to deal with job disruption? How are we going to deal with the automation, not just of the economy, but potentially warfare? And so I think we have to look at this. I participated in a stress testing this recently where we looked at our democracy and we split into groups of institutionalists and capitalists, and some played the nationalists. And what are the deals we're going to have to cut? What are we going to do at moments of crisis when a government wants to nationalize or take 10% of your company, or wants to have its shock troops come here and say that certain people don't belong here who have lived here for decades and their children are citizens? We don't have those playbooks. At the same time, they're being written. Look what just happened in Hungary. Look at places where folks are applying new technology in really great ways that are providing opportunity, not just concentrating wealth. So I guess my answer is get ready to be more radical. Don't be scared by radical. That doesn't mean extreme. It just means the scale of our ambition has to meet the moment. We don't even know if universities are going to have the same role or be the same places. And that's scary to us. If you live in a university, so last thing I'd say is when you talked where you started the question with white collar workers now, remember all revolutions rarely begin at the bottom. There's a couple peasant revolutions. Occasionally there's some blue collar workers behind things, but it's usually that white collar or middle class. It's those people who are elite enough who suddenly see their good going away the way that maybe people underneath them have been living their whole lives when the revolutions begin. So if we're to forestall revolution, we better be pretty revolutionary in our thinking.
And I think, and I do agree with you. I think this generation, your daughter being was 14, going to go through the college.
I sure hope so.
I often get asked in social and even professional gathering that which major should my kid go and which school, right?
And you always say logistics, right?
No, I say supply chain for sure. And so that's, somebody's got to move the boxes,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Even if you manufacture everything in one state, you're going to have to move across the states. So there'll always be a job for the supply chain. No, but the idea here is the American dream, in its definition, 3 generations ago, 2 generations ago, it was respectful to be a blue collar, raise a decent family, buy your first home, and make a good, honest living, right? We skewed away that into that 4-year degrees, 6 years, 10 years, white collar, Wall Street, right? So we created that culture. I think that's the one big avenue that I feel that's burning platform, so to speak. But I think all of these things will require resources, and I was thinking about it, and this question came up in my talk in Austin. It's like, how do we fund these things? Because government, right, we're clocking a $39 trillion deficit. I think we can fight the war, spend $500 million, $500 billion rather, but not actually invest that as a proactive. So I thought about 2 things, and I would love to hear your perspective. One is a concept called AI tax, right? We are creating a generations of trillionaires with promise. Because money doesn't flow where there is a darkness. It's always looking for the spot where there is a bright energy. Yeah. The amount of money that's being flown into this system and the valuation suddenly promises an incredible gold rush. Yeah. That's purely coming out of the productivity, efficiency, and incredible things that we'll have in the future. Maybe that's a tax, AI tax, proportionate to whatever that efficiency is, reinvesting into the human capital, redoing it. And then the second would be, and this is not the concept, new concept, about the universal guaranteed income, right? The UGI. That we're going to have to create some social fabric to make sure that our society or part of our society population don't fall through the cracks. What ideas do you think, first of all, what are the merits of something like this? Are we ambitious and knowledgeable enough to actually execute some of these things proactively, not wait for 5 years later.
Well, when I was mayor, we launched, I co-founded with the first person to try this experiment, Michael Tubbs, who was the mayor of Stockton, youngest mayor of a big city in American history, maybe, or America at that time. And he started a experiment with a basic income, a guaranteed income in Stockton for a group of people. And all the outcomes were what we expected: better health return, better education, better opportunities. Somebody can't get that better job if they don't have the child care to cover their child who otherwise is at home because they're too poor to afford child care. And then we launched what was then the biggest in the country experiment right here in these neighborhoods right around USC and other parts of Los Angeles, and found a similar outcome. It's immensely expensive to do that for everybody, but it may be cheaper than the costs in the long term when we say, why are people homeless? Why are there people in the criminal justice system? Why are there people who are dropping out of high school? You look at the reasons why, often it comes down to the means that they have in that household. We all know people who are wealthy, whose children go through all sorts of difficulties, but most of them get through that somehow because they have the means to get through it.
The resources.
The resources to. And yet, if you're poor, I was talking to a friend, who got arrested as a kid for shoplifting. He said, if I were poor, I probably would have gone down a whole pathway of never getting out of the criminal justice system, never graduating from high school, et cetera. But he said, but I came from a pretty well-off family. So I got bailed out. I got punished. I realized I was a knucklehead. I turned my life around. He's a very successful, person now. And, for us, I think as compelling as a guaranteed income is, if we're creating wealth at these moments, I would say we also need to look at a way of a basic guaranteed wealth. That at these moments of wealth creation, why can't we share that? Right now, the only way to do that is if you're lucky enough to have a pension or a little discretionary money to invest. And certainly a lot of people, when companies like an Apple go up or whatever, they make sometimes enough to retire on or to supplement their income.
So would that be something different than the taxing the AI infrastructure
It
or
depends
AI?
how you want to distribute that. Now, can we build value? I love, take it like billboards. Los Angeles is full of billboards. The people of LA don't get $1 from any of those billboards, except a few that maybe are in the metro system or something where we get a guaranteed income. In other cities, when they've said yes to billboards, they said, yeah, but we got 10% of it. So it becomes common wealth for everybody in that city, whether it's done through government or whether it's done in an individual way that's distributed, like in Alaska, where everybody gets from the oil
Or
extraction a
revenue?
check.
Absolutely, yeah.
And we've tried to do that here in California. And the same companies that pay in Alaska beat it down every single time here in California and say it's going to cost you more at the pump, which is not true. We have to figure out ways to share the wealth. If the whole pitch is AI is going to create immense wealth, it shouldn't just be in the hands of a few people or early investors. It should be for society, or a good chunk of that has to. And when I hear folks that are tech entrepreneurs, many of them are for the guaranteed income, which is a good step. But you only want to do that temporarily to help people get out of poverty. Long term, what we want to create is wealth. And this generation, when you talk about this generation, first generation that's going to earn less than the parents, first generation going down in home ownership, and even our brains, it's the first generation where brain development is going down, partially because of the algorithms that are feeding some of the technology that we're addicted to. It's actually causing us to be
dumbing
less
us down. Yeah,
smart.
absolutely.
So we can't let this generation, my daughter's generation, be poorer, dumber, and also less opportunities. And I think that we actually, the amazing thing is, do have this rising tide. The question is, will it swamp us or will it lift us? And if we're smart, we can make it lift us.
I'm optimistic. I think when you start to look at companies now, valuations surpassing $1 trillion was a big shock, right? It was a big news, and now you're talking about $3, $4, $5 trillion, right? SpaceX IPO is likely to go up 1.8 to $2 trillion. I mean, the numbers we're seeing are, you're talking about the money that is greater than the GDP of many countries.
Most countries.
And most countries, right? So I'm talking about when we start to have this conversation, and I'm thinking, if I'm a policymaker, it doesn't matter at the local city level, county, state, or at the country, I would be allocating my resources to say, let's study this, let's build some what-if scenarios, let's invest some time and resources and mitigate these things before this comes back, right? You can't dig a well once the fire started. You got to plan and have those wells ready. So just in case when the fire happens, I feel like this burning platform, we're deflecting an opportunity to really anticipate.
I agree. And to go back to your 3 Ps, there's a limit to what people can take. There's a limit to the suffering. There's a limit to the exclusion. There's a limit to the backwards movement that they will take. There's a limit to what the planet can take, whether it's through warfare or whether it's through climate shocks, which everybody's experiencing living in New Delhi. I breathed the worst air, I think, that's ever been created in human history. It was 1,738 on the air quality index. For those of folks who don't monitor the AQI, here in LA during the fires, it was about 150, and people were crying and like feeling,
Very
you know,
menaced, yeah.
asthmatic, 10 times that. It was the hottest temperature ever in New Delhi history. It was about 124 with near 100% humidity, and more flooding than Delhi had ever experienced, more rainfall, 24-hour period. That all happened in a single year. And so there, you know, the planet has limits, people have limits, and I think profits should have some limits. I mean, if we say limiting profit will stop some good from happening, I would counter that. Unlimited profits, overly concentrated, are you willing to pay the price? And like you, I'm an optimist. Human beings are stubborn and creative. We want to survive, and we love doing new things. So let's put that survival instinct and that creativity to good policy. And I think one of the biggest problems in our country and our world is you have people who know capital and capitalism. You have people who know people, and there's not very many good interpreters in between. They speak in different universes. And you need these bridge builders who will say, look, we want you to have profits, and we want there to be creativity and expansion and evolution. And these folks say, yes, but people need to have a decent life and opportunity and health and education and the basics that make human life worth living.
Absolutely. So you talked about the Delhi and your time in India. You are probably the most liked and loved ambassador in India. And you know, I spent time also in India with our work in supply chain and stuff. I think ever since you left your position as an ambassador, every person, both in the industry and the policymaker and at the staff level, they miss you tremendously. So you are certainly an adopted Indian.
I'll wear it proudly. And the love is both ways. I miss and love India. I'm actually headed there for the first time since I left, and been going there since I was 14. And India has contributed more to human civilization than is written into the history books. I always say Japan, which many things are invented other places and Japan perfects them. India is the inverse. They invent so many things and never get the credit for it because it gets exported from Buddhism to mathematics to everything. And secondly, I always remind people that India is not a nation, it's a world with, you know, double the population of the entirety of Europe, with as much diversity as a continent like Europe in a single country that's a miraculous way works. And like any democracy that's diverse, like ours, it's tougher to be a democracy than not. It's tougher to be diverse than not, but would we want the world any other way? So I thank you for the kind words. It was one of the greatest experiences of my life, and India has always been and will continue to be a part of my soul.
And I remember you shared the story, and I think you had hosted dinner at your home, and I was there. As a mayor, we were planning to actually take the business delegation to India, and we spoke about it. And here I met you when you were ambassador. We did some great work together there. But your story started at a very early age, where you had an opportunity to stay in ambassador's house as a student. Yeah. Tell us the story.
Well, you know, my parents, my father grew up about 4 blocks away from here, from USC, and came here on scholarship. Son of Mexican immigrants, first to graduate from college in his family. And he met my mom, who was daughter of Jewish immigrants who had grown up in Central and then West Los Angeles. My grandfather made Louis Roth clothes, suits that were the finest suits in America, here downtown in a union shop when we still used to make suits in America. And they were from opposite sides of the track. She was a UC girl, he was a Trojan boy. And Pan Am Airlines downtown is where they first met. And my dad asked my mom out 3 weeks, 6 weeks before he was about to leave the country. And 3 weeks later, they got engaged. And 3 weeks later, just before leaving, so 6 weeks from first date to wedding, they got married. And my mom kept working at Pan Am, and my father went to law school at UCLA across town. And so they traveled on the benefit of being able to travel for free, first just as a couple. And then when my sister and I were born, if we had an extra nickel, they didn't buy a bigger car or a nicer house. They'd take us around the world. So my first trip was actually 14 years old. In 1985, I went to India. And boy, what a different India it was. You couldn't buy Coca-Cola because the economic policies, there's Campa-Cola. But it captured my heart, just its through story through the ages. And then I decided when I got to college, I went to Columbia College undergrad, to take Hindi and Urdu as my language requirement. People are like, why are you taking that? I'm like, because I don't know. There's something about India that stuck with me. And my college roommate randomly assigned to me, a kid named Jared Clark, who's still a friend. His father, my sophomore year, becomes the US ambassador to India. And he said, hey, Eric, you're studying that language. Why don't we go to India for spring break? And I stayed in the ambassador's residence, never imagining I'd come back some decades later to live in the
As an
ambassador's
ambassador,
residence
that
in
is.
India. So, and I actually, the story goes a little further. I was going to go there for my junior year abroad to live in Bodh Gaya, the town in Bihar where Buddha reached full enlightenment while meditating under the Bodhi tree. And I also ran for student council, and politics has gotten in the way of a lot of good things in my life. I'm very grateful for it.
Hey.
But I got elected and I never got to India, and I thought I never would until Joe Biden said, hey, pal, I need you to consider this. And it was a dream come true.
So you would have been a monk, but now you're in you're in
Well,
the politics,
I
like
still-
you're being a monk.
Those who are watching this can see, but those who are listening, you can hear that. This is my bracelet from Bodh Gaya, where as ambassador, I finally got there and got to meditate under that Bodhi tree where Buddha reached full enlightenment.
What a story, and and I see the role that you played, but also the country India plays. You talk about two of the largest democracies, functioning democracies, complex democracies, and when the forces of this top-down structure, authoritarian structures, can show you evidence that they're much more efficient from the policy to the execution. And it actually even questions the framework of democracy. Right? Every 4 or 5 years, it's changing leadership. The conversations, everything is debatable. Or in another system, it's all, you think about it, you execute, and speed to market is much rapid. So I think there are forces that we're going to have to deal with in terms of countering and taking the best of the democracy, and then learn how to become efficient in terms of getting it done in the right way.
I think you're right. It's, democracies can be a pain in the butt. I've been part of difficult community meetings. I've been part of international negotiations. Even the democracy, so to speak, between countries, even if they aren't individually democracies, the one country, one vote, and trying to get the G20 to agree on something, even though some of those countries aren't even democracies, that can be really tough. But it's a beautiful process. It's why we're here. It's what families do. It's what communities do and neighborhoods do. If we can't work out our differences, talk about them. And I really think it's so important. Like, we've lost that ability to do it on too many college campuses and too many families and too many countries. To just agree to disagree or to compromise, my God, the dirtiest word it seems like in politics these days is compromise, when that's what democracy demands by definition, because 100% of the people can't have 100% of what they want and still have a functioning system. Fight for what you want, but celebrate getting something and not always everything. That's going to be, I think, really important. And India taught me great things. You're right. We have to be able to counter the big autocracies, but there's plenty of inefficient autocracies and smaller ones and people's human rights who suffer. I don't want to live in those places. I want to live in America. I want to live in a democracy. I want to live in a diverse population. And those are great, great strengths. But I think we do have to figure out a way forward in the midst of this technological change. Ironically, it's that democracy that has positioned us, not just our wealth, to be, for instance, with AI, the 3 biggest companies, maybe even 6. There's a Chinese model out there too, but by far the biggest ones that are most advanced are because of the freedom we have here.
Absolutely.
So it can be a great advantage, not just disadvantage.
No, I agree.
But on the flip side, we have to know too that we can't over-concentrate power in any country in the world, because that's a great threat to all of us, including that country, I would offer.
I agree completely. So, when I look at it, let's come back to the issues we started with, the geopolitics. Right? Yes, absolutely, we've been in a peaceful trade for post-World War II. Yes, we had a few wars, but they were very controlled, very localized, and we have been able to come through those somewhat successfully. Russia, Ukraine happened, continues to happen. There's no closure on that forefront, right? It's a data point that doesn't seem big because it doesn't impact us, but think about 28% of the wheat production has been decimated. Countries like Africa, Middle East, MENA regions, so the Latin American and India's subcontinent, wheat is almost 40+% of the caloric intake. Right? Sunflower seeds, so fertilizers, and I can name a couple other commodities, has been impacted, will continue to be impacted. We have Iran crisis, the Strait of Hormuz, potentially could be South China conflict. Are we sort of surfacing this as a unstable decades or the fourth spin cycle of this prosperity wheel where we have now come full circle and say, hey, we got to go back and either blow everything up and restart? Where are we?
Well, I think you highlighted something first that is about the vulnerabilities and oftentimes the unhealthiness of the system as it is today. Unhealthiness to just be dependent on oil, and we know that's bad not just for us as people, but planet, even though 80% of our economy still globally depends on hydrocarbons for its energy. Unhealthy for us the way we eat, that, just getting the most efficient wheat that has been modified for the best output, but sometimes losing a lot of its nutritional value, could easily be replaced with healthier legumes and other things that we all need to eat more of and are moving towards. So we could, as China is doing, electrify our systems and make them more domestic and local with renewables. We could grow and eat more healthily in places like Africa and in places like the middle of America where we eat junk food that's processed. Those things, I think, are legitimate ways of looking at why we're both vulnerable and how quickly we might be able to find some of these solutions. And each one of us put it in a country, in a neighborhood, in a state, in a city where we live, so that when things do happen globally, it's less of a shock. It's less of a shock. And even what's happening in the Strait of Hormuz, as much as we saw the price of oil go up, it could have gone easily double that if we hadn't done some of the work of the renewables. China has less of a blow, as dependent as they are on Middle East oil, because of electrification they've been doing and putting that into renewables and zero carbon solutions. So I think that we have to figure out a way to do this for our own health, our planet's health. And I don't think it's just a cycle. I think it's a moment of inflection. I know that it's inevitable we are going to decarbonize, because it's happening not just in California, where last year we had 100% of our power from renewables, and it was solar, number one. Number two was battery storage. But it's also happening, don't tell anybody, in Florida, Texas, and Ohio, where 70% of the renewables last year were installed in states that are run by Republicans. They don't talk about it, but they're decarbonizing the Permian Basin in Texas with wind and solar because it's inevitable and cheaper and creates jobs and all of these arguments. So I think people are waking up to this and will collectively get there. The question is, will we admit it and will we accelerate it?
So let's go back 10 years. I would say that you were on this campus as a mayor, where we signed the MOU with Secretary Pritzker on the digitization of America's supply chain. Tell me what you've seen. In Kendrick Institute for Global Supply Chain has gone through evolution, but tell me your perspective, where we are today to where we started. What have you observed?
Wow, I mean, there's been incredible breakthroughs when it comes to our supply chain. Digital and predictive software that now, I assume in an AI era, since I'm out of the loop for a year or two, is leapfrogged even our ambitions. Great leaders like Gene Soroka, who runs our port, who was looking at ways to lessen pollution, increase efficiency by getting folks to use software ahead of time so we don't have ships idling off of our coast, polluting our neighborhoods, but also slowing down and raising the prices of our goods. I also see, a green side of this. When I was chair of C40 Cities, which is the 100 largest cities of the world climate action group, the only group, by the way, of the 100 largest city mayors. It's an amazing felt like I was part of the civic Avengers when I was leading it. We launched something called the Green Ports Initiative, and the first green corridor on shipping was done between Shanghai and Los
Less and
Angeles at a time when those countries were talking less and less. We were able to still carve out that this was so important that we could get through with logistics. And I think logistics is something so not political, and I do believe it is so sexy because people all touch the products of logistics, so they understand and are still, I think, amazed. This comes from so far away, this thing that's my child loves, or this cool thing that I'm cooking with, or whatever it is. The digitization, though, I think still has a long way to go, just as it does in our air traffic and in our air cargo, to be able to figure out a way for us to take those efficiencies, because the pandemic, after we signed that, showed us still how behind we were in moments of crisis. This war in Iran is showing us how far we are in moments of crisis. Logistics isn't just about systems, it's about the substance. And it's not just about the substance, it's about the people. And if we don't have a people-centered logistics system, digitization has to feed those needs, has to question, is the just-in-time model the only right model? And so can we communicate at a local level, for instance, what is being domestically made, so that digitization helps control, like right now, all these empty ships that can't even go to China right now because there's nothing to take there.
back. Yep.
At a moment when suddenly there are goods that can come here and create jobs, they're unable to even get the ships. 86 of them, I think I heard on the radio yesterday, that they need to get there. They can't even get across the ocean. So I think we've got a long way to go, but it was very path-breaking. It was path-breaking of the administration, the Obama administration at the time, and this should be a nonpartisan thing. It's always sad to see, as you said, our democracy changes and people say, well, I don't want to do what the last guy did. Well, some things you should.
Absolutely,
And this is one of
absolutely.
them.
You know, I was blessed to be able to serve under both sides, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
the Trump 1.0,
Yep.
President Obama, and then Biden subsequently. And I think it is. Supply chains are politically agnostic, right? That is what the supply chain is supposed to be, to connect the world resources for the betterments of the humanity and make us a somewhat intelligent species.
They're not agnostic, I would offer. They're universal.
Yeah, they're universal.
It's a religion we all share. One of the few things that brings us together as human beings.
And I think we need to stay interconnected. So I think we're coming to a close. And, you know, my world, the moment I wake up to the time I hit the sack, it's about the global trade, global supply chains.
And to be clear, you don't sleep, right?
And I don't
Yeah,
sleep.
yeah,
I
right,
mean,
okay.
yeah, no, but
For that 1 hour of sleep.
the 1 or 2 hours, right? No, but, you know, as you know, our world has been on fire since 2020. And just when you think the pandemic was enough, geopolitics, just when you think geopolitics, the policy-induced disruption, right? And there's no sort of a calming down pulse points at this point in at least near future. To my students, young students or audience, have your closing message, that of the hope and inspiration, but also somewhat struck in reality. So 5 years from now, when you and I, or maybe we'll do much more frequently on an annual basis, but if we were to watch this together over a glass of wine 5 years from now.
We've lived in not only an age of stability, but I would say an age of rage and an age of laziness. The rage of our emotions, but that will pass because we can't live in rage too long. And laziness because we've been very lucky that those stable structures demanded less of us. Democracy is going to be okay. All I need to do is vote, maybe donate once in a while, and I'm done. And nothing in the 364 days between with elections. Lazy because, oh my gosh, AI is going to do it all for us. And I would say the future will be written by how unlazy we are. It'll be written too by how much we lead with love instead of rage. And it will be written by how ambitious we are. And I would encourage us to be human, which I believe is loving, ambitious, and stubborn, hardworking. You know, living in India, I saw an incredibly vibrant democracy that people fight for every single day in a way that we haven't had to do here. But I'm convinced it'll be a democracy, unless the whole system of democracy disappears on the face of the earth, it'll be a democracy the day I die. It is so much plugged into who the Indian people are. And we're not moving away, you know, to a inevitable point of human beings suffering, of democracy disappearing, of us just going to a place where nobody has a job. We all have agency. And every night during the pandemic, you know, I got on the television. It's funny, we said need to start communicating. We thought we'd just be streaming on our own, but obviously there wasn't much news. So every channel in Los Angeles would carry me live about 6 o'clock every day. And then I'd go to Spanish channels and do the same thing. So for half hour to 45 minutes every day, I'd give an update. And somebody told me that one of the smartest things was communicate relentlessly, which I did because we were all feeling so isolated, but give people something to do. Don't let them feel powerless. So my message to your students, to human beings, is that we have a great capacity for love and innovation, but do something. Don't be lazy. Don't be angry. Don't be that cliche of somebody looking at your stream on a couch, upset, but doing nothing about it. Be stubborn, be loving, be creative, and we're going to be okay.
Absolutely. And I think to recap Ambassador Garcetti's point of view, as I said, I'm the most optimistic person about the technologies to start with, including multi-agentic AI capabilities. There are two things one can do. One, do nothing and wake up to a point where you find yourself that there is no room for you to catch up. Or B, we become proactive. We embrace the potentiality and understand that these are all the opportunities that we have to actually do something meaningful. This concept of 40-hour work week wasn't an universal concept. It is post-World War, where we create these industrial systems where we decided that 40 hours a week is a work week. Our forefathers and ancestors, lived off the land. They worked 7 days a week, many times from sunrise to the sunset, right? And maybe this is the era where we will see that we only need to work 24 hours and still have an incredible human society that is compassionate, conscious living, and we work together and we stay interconnected and try to avoid all these conflicts because we have spent so much resources tearing down things than building together.
Absolutely.
So when we talk about supply chain demystified, from a great wisdom of somebody from policy side, an amazing mayor in this city of Los Angeles, as well as ambassador to India and a very close friend, Eric, thank you so very much. I greatly appreciate it.
Could talk to you forever, but you all have things to do, people.
Thank you so very much. Once again, welcome. And I hope you enjoy this episode of Supply Chain Demystified with Ambassador Garcetti. And I bid you amazing rest of the time until I see you next time. Thank you. Fight on.
We hope you enjoyed another exciting episode of Supply Chain Demystified. Stay tuned for the next demystifying discussion on the supply chain. Visit uscsupplychain.com to stay up to date on all things supply chain.